said, we're in the final week of our sermon series for such a time as this. Over this sermon series, we've been talking about the story of Esther, but we've also been looking at our story as a church, which I think aligns with that very much in terms of Esther found her way into a place and a time and was challenged to consider that maybe she was there for more than just the moment that she thought she was there for. Not just to protect herself, but to help those that never could protect themselves, to do something bigger than ourselves. But I know that many of us haven't been here every single week, or maybe missed the first week, or again, maybe this is your first time, you've not heard any of them. Maybe some of us have read the whole story of Esther before, maybe some of us have never read it before. And so I want to give you a little bit of a recap without hitting everything too much, but give you an idea of what's happening in Esther from start to finish. And last week I kind of left you on a cliffhanger of like what happened, and so I want to close the end of the story and say where we're going. And that, but to get everyone caught up, just in case you missed a week or two, or maybe you haven't been here at all, the book of Esther begins more or less with a misuse of power and a misuse of privilege. The king Xerxes throws this 6-month rager. He's like getting people together, they're drinking, they're partying, and sounds like a great time, but really what he's trying to do here is like flex his power, his authority. Like he wants people to have a good time, but he wants people to know how much money he has, how much power he has, and how much influence he has. And in this, he's parading his Queen Vashti around in front of everyone, or he wants to. And she's like, I'm not going to play this game. I'm not going to be a pawn. I'm not going to be manipulated. I'm not going to be objectified. And so she's kind of banished from this in the midst of this party. And so King Xerxes says, I have to try to now replace my queen. So he has a beauty contest throughout all of the nation. And he says, I want you to be a part of this. And you're like, oh, that sounds sweet. They weren't invited to be a part of this. They were voluntold to be entered into this beauty contest, right? And so Esther is one of these people that is thrust into this without really her choice. And what's interesting is she ends up winning. She's seen as very beautiful. She's strikingly beautiful to the king, and so she finds her way into this space as the new queen. But what King Xerxes doesn't know, at least initially, is that she is not a part of the community and the nation and the tribe of King Xerxes. She's actually a Jewish woman, and because of that, her whole safety is up for debate. Like, Jews were not safe in their community. And so for her, she was encouraged by her cousin Mordecai to hide her heritage, to hide her faith, her religion, her ethnicity, to hide it for her own safety in the midst of this. But she becomes queen with King Xerxes. And as she becomes queen, there is this plot to kill King Xerxes. And Mordecai, her cousin, finds out about it, stops it, foils it, doesn't end up happening. And Mordecai gets like trust chips put into the trust piggy bank with him and King Xerxes. He doesn't get much more influence because he's a Jewish guy. He doesn't get much more power and prestige, but he gets trust put into that piggy bank. And so he has an ear of the king, elevating Mordecai kind of this place of trust. But then Mordecai, in this place of trust, there's this other person in the story named Haman. We hit him in a few of the weeks. He is what I would call the anti-Esther. Everything that Esther is, Haman is not. Esther is humble, and she's there, and she's hiding who some of she is to protect herself and maybe protect others. She's not seeking her own position or privilege. Haman's out for himself. He wants everyone to know who he is, and he wants to be in power, and he wants more power so that he can eventually get more power. And he asks Mordecai to bow to him. Mordecai doesn't, and this infuriates Haman. And so he says, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a secret law he's kind of a governor more or less in this. So I'm going to write a law, I'm going to write an edict that says we're going to eradicate, we're going to do a genocide of all of the Jewish people in this region, in this nation. We're going to wipe them out, all because Mordecai wouldn't give me the power and the respect that I feel that I deserved. And this is the crisis that kind of sits in front of Esther in this story. Like, her people are now not potentially, not hypothetically, but tangibly and literally in danger of being wiped out in this community. And this is a moment where for her, everything is on the line. But it also doesn't really feel for Esther like everything's on the line, because she's in the royal court, in the throne room. No one knows she's a Jewish woman. The king Xerxes doesn't know this, so she could keep it hidden. She could keep her comfy seat in her beautiful crown, and she could stay safe, and she could stay hidden, and she could be this person that still has safety of what's going on. And Mordecai, her cousin, goes up to her in the midst of this, knowing that she feels safe and knowing that she feels comfortable, and challenges her and says, don't think that your seat's going to protect you. Don't think just because you have a beautiful crown and a comfy throne and you're in the king's courtroom that you're going to be protected. And he challenges her, he says, whether you know this or not, someone is going to come up and rise up. Someone's going to push back. Something's going to happen. But I think you, Esther, maybe came to this time, in this place, in this power, in this prestige, in this royal office for such a time as this. Maybe you, Esther, of all people, have the opportunity to rewrite history and to actually help the people that feel voiceless, help the people that could not have helped themselves, to give a seat at the table to those that were not offered one themselves. And Esther, it's really interesting in the story, like she had two options. She could have stayed safe. She could have played it safe. She could have stayed hidden. She could have chose herself instead of courageously protecting other people. But instead, she risks everything. She risks her safety, her prestige, her privilege, her protection, and she walks in to King Xerxes and she throws these banquets, two of them, quite brilliant and I think strategic in how she does, and she makes a request. This is where I left off last week. You're like, what was the request? She makes this request to King Xerxes, says, spare my life and spare my people's life, more or less is what she's saying. She's like, she reveals her identity, and she's like, you know me, you trust me, and like, I'm not someone that this country is showing much respect to. Like, I'm on the path of Haman's destruction, so I want you to spare my life, but I also want you to spare the life of my brothers and my sisters, my neighbors, people that are a part of my community that I don't even know. Like, protect us. And would you do this? She's leveraging her position and her power and her influence with someone who has even more of that, the power to do something to actually change what's happening. And in this banquet, Haman is exposed as the person he is. He's trying to lead this genocide. He's trying to do this thing, again, really in many ways seen as the anti-Esther. But here's the deal. The law that Haman wrote was irreversible. Like, he wrote this law that said these people are going to be eradicated, and there's nothing that they can do to rewrite that. And so they have to get creative. And they said, well, we're not going to undo what was done, but we're going to write a new path forward. We're going to write our own edict and our own law that gives the Jewish people the opportunity to assemble, to gather, to protect themselves, a right that they were not previously afforded, to be able to rise up and to protect themselves. And in doing so, King Xerxes and Mordecai and Esther make this change that empower Jews to protect themselves and to fight for themselves, and this ripple effect lasts generations. It protects Esther, and it protects the people in their community, but this is still one of the major Jewish holidays that is celebrated, of celebrating Esther's moment where she had this decision of courage, but a choice to protect herself or to think about others, to wonder if her seat at the table mattered more than those that she would maybe never encounter. And she makes a sacrificial choice to say that I want to care not just about myself, but I want to leverage the place I am to help those that maybe could never help themselves. And I would encourage you, if you haven't read it, to go read the entire story of Esther. It's a shorter book, and one of my favorite things about it is God is never mentioned in it. Not because I don't like God. I think God is Job. I think God should be mentioned everywhere. But one of the things that I love about it is oftentimes you're like, well, the only way to know God is there is to hear God explicitly. God said this, and God said unto them, do that, and God explicitly told me, and that's not anywhere in the book of Esther, but I would argue more than any other book in the Bible, God's fingerprints are all over it. Like, God's fingerprints are everywhere, from the way that Esther courageously acts, the way that Esther has a vision that far supersedes her own protection of herself, the way that Mordecai challenges Esther to think outside of herself. Even King Xerxes, who is not a part of their religion or their group or their country or their tribe, is moved by something that maybe is unnameable within his heart and his spirit to protect a people that otherwise might have been seen as an enemy. Like, there is God's fingerprints all over this book if you want to see them there, and I find that to be a beautiful thing in this story. And I would say for us, I would contend we're in a similar sort of space as a church. Standing in this moment where we wonder and we ask, like, where are we going to go as a church, and what are we going to do, and are we going to be a church that is about something maybe bigger than ourselves? Our story is different, our context is different, but I think the shape is somewhat similar to Esther's story. That's one of the reasons we've been going through that. And over these last several weeks, we've done these things called these Such a Time as This nights. We've had about 90 plus people attend these. We sent out like 100 something invites, and we know that we had a lot of people. Not everyone could attend. We're going to try to do one more to make sure anyone that couldn't can attend if they want to. But over the course of these, we've been talking about these, and some people have been like first-time attenders, and some of these have been people with us from day one. It's been a pretty eclectic group of people that have joined us for these, but we've been presenting through the story of Esther and through the story and the data of the partner gathering that we did, which was our quarterly gathering. We come together. We talked about, like, well, what do we think God is calling us to as a church. Because you look around this space today, 1045 is supposed to be our lightly attended service, guys. This is supposed to be the one that no one shows up to. And we're packing it out every single, like God is doing something here where people in a community that were told that religion was outdated, that they would never have a seat at the table because of what they look like or who they love or how they vote or whatever, like that they wouldn't be able to, it was incompatible with being Christian, and this like culture around us is hungry for something different. And I would contend that maybe this is the moment of the time that God has called us to for such a time as this. And we've been talking about this in these nights of saying, like, well, what would it look like for us, like Esther, to with courage, dream, and imagine, with imagination and creativity, maybe bigger than we ever had, to say, what would it look like to go forward in courage where God might be leading us, even if we don't know the steps that are exactly ahead of us. And I've shared this over the course of the last several Sundays, but just in case you missed it, but you might have heard these at some of these evenings as well. There are interesting and I think staggering stats that permeate the church right now. Something like 43% of Gen Z has never attended church before. That's the emerging generation right now. Gen Alpha is below them, but 43% of Gen Z has never attended a church before. 70% of people still, though, identify as spiritual. That's kind of interesting to me, right? 1 in 5 St. Louis metro residents don't attend church, and church attendance is down 30% from 2000, and 70% of our metro area identifies, that's you guys included in this, churchgoers and non-churchgoers, as not interested in what religion has to offer, what church has to offer. And that's really interesting to me. And what's interesting in that is, like, we have seen a growing population of people that have no religious experience or have walked away from religious experience, but also are still hungry for something deeply spiritual, even if it's something they're not sure they could name. And another stat that's interesting, and I'm a huge stats nerd. I dive into things like Barna and Pew all the time to look at their stats, and they just put out a stat on the least trusted professions, like, out there. And there's certain ones that, like, are pretty low. You could probably guess them. If anyone here is a used car salesman, I think you are the most trustworthy one. But they're usually, like, down at the bottom, and that has nothing to do with that. I don't know what that has to do with, but they're usually down at the bottom. Pastors have dropped below that now. Like, we're like one of the lowest trusted professions out there. I think like something like 35% of people trust clergy. Like, it's really, like, we're one of the lowest trusted professions, but 70% of people are still interested and inspired by something spiritual in their heart, maybe if they don't know what they are. So what that tells me is people are hungry for what I would contend Jesus offers, but they're pretty not interested in the way the church has been offering it, right? They're really interested in the story of who Jesus is and why he matters and what he's been giving people and offering people, but the way the church has articulated that is not the most compelling, and I would argue, if I'm being really pointed about it, not actually the way Jesus would have went about offering it in general. And Jesus says this in the gospel. He says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. He's talking about this idea that, like, there are a lot of people out there really hungry for a story of hope and good news. Past Jesus' death and resurrection, we would say a story of resurrection, a story of hope where things look dead and impossible to turn them around, right? Like Jesus said, the harvest is plentiful. There's people hungry for it. Our stats say that 70% of people are interested, but the laborers are few. Like, people that are interested in sharing that story, creating those spaces, living in the tension and living in the nuance, and saying that your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. Like, that's a few set of laborers that are out there. And when we look around, I would contend, if I was putting it in my own words, that the need is greater than it's ever been, but the opportunity for who we are and who we can be as a church has become clearer than it's ever been. To fill the need and fill the gap, and to be the kind of church that the world is not seeing, that our region is certainly not seeing. The need is great, but the opportunity, I think, for us is quite clear in where we're going. And I share this in our partner gatherings as well, that we're kind of at an inflection point, I think, as a church. We have a couple options of what we can do. And one of those options is to continue to be a church that's going to stay here. And not just stay here, but be about us. To be about those that are already here, those that have found our space. Like, you look around right now, like, we're running out of seats, we're running out of space. I'll share this. Like, we have about 300 people that join us on a Christmas Eve, just in this space alone. Like, it gets full. And eventually, our mantra comes up to tension with the reality of it. That, can we really say we're a place where your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs if we don't have seats for people, right? And we talk about how wonderful that mantra is and how we're a church for all people. I want to spoil that for you. I don't want to, but I'm going to spoil that for you. We're not a church for all people. We have not been able to welcome people with accessibility needs ever since we moved into this space. I've carried wheelchairs up the stairs, and I've helped guide people around this and come in, and it's not only off-putting, it's slightly embarrassing, and it's in no way inclusive of people that have any level of accessibility needs. And I think many of us, our hearts break for that, because it's us saying with one thing everyone is welcome, but in reality not actually practicing what we preach. Like, I think that option one for us is to say we want to be a church that continues to be the church we are and stay here and only be interested in the people that we currently have. But for those of the people that don't know they have a seat, for people with any sort of neurodivergence and have a kids ministry experience for them, any accessibility needs, any of that, like, be able to create a space that is actually accessible in every single way and believes not just we're creating space for queer people, which we do exceptionally and unapologetically and well, but we're a church that believes we're going to create space for everyone who has not been told they have a seat at the table, because Jesus was about creating seats, not taking them away. And so I would say we have an opportunity to decide, is that what we want to do? And I think it's not maybe the church we were designed to be, the choice that feels the most like us, but it is a choice we can make. But I think the second option in this road would be maybe the more faithful one, which is to grow forward, to continue to create seats for people at the table. And I wanted to share a story of someone whose seat we did create at the table along the way. You might know her. She was at the first service. I asked if I could share this story. Her name's Marissa. We celebrated her baptism here a couple months ago, and it was this wonderful opportunity to share baptism with her, and it was this amazing opportunity. I remember her first Sunday she came in here. She sat in the back, like the furthest back row you could be in the corner. As far away from me as humanly possible, maybe is what she was trying to do. And she sat in the back, and her arms like this, and she was crossed, and she looked pissed to be here. And I'm like, sister, this is not an easy place to find. Like you chose to come here. Like JT talked about, you had to make the turn in here. It was life-changing and risking to get in this building. And so you got like, why are you mad? But like, I get it. Like, you guys have had, like, you're like, when you walk into a church, oftentimes your guard is up as high as it can possibly be. You're nervous, and she was certainly nervous. I know many of you in your first experiences have shared that as well. And she was sitting in the back, and I remember I was preaching about justice and the kind of justice that Jesus had and what that was all about. And I talked about Jesus flipping tables, and I watched her arms like uncross when I said that, and her shoulders dip, and like a frown that was pretty aggressive go to like a smile. And then the sermon ended, and we talked a little bit, and she came back. And she came back, and she came back, and she like didn't miss a Sunday for like 8 weeks. And then eventually she got confident. She said, I want to explore baptism. I want to like be a part of this thing in a way that I haven't. And that was so beautiful to celebrate with her, and it was kind of alarming to some of her friends, because if you have that person in your friend group, you're like, that person's never going to go to church, and that person's probably never going to get baptized. Like, Marissa was that person for her friend group, and she made a choice to take a step forward, because for the first time in her life, she was told she had a seat at the table, and she was told that her questions and her doubts and her experiences didn't take that away, that she was able to be who she was as she came into this space. And one of the reasons that I challenge us to grow forward as the option that feels the most like us is because Marissa's story is not the exception. Like, there are a lot of Marissas out there that don't know they have a seat at the table. A lot of people out there who have been told no because of what they look like or who they love or how they live their life or any of these things, and that they deeply they're in this 70% that maybe is really spiritual, and this 70% that's really interested in Jesus, and the 70% that really wants to know and grow and deepen their faith, but church time and time again tells them, but not, you can't do that. Like, you don't have a seat at the table. Like, you're not the kind of person that Jesus would be after. Like, the reason that we want to grow forward and create seats is because we believe that there's still someone who doesn't know they have one. And that's the work that Jesus has been radically a part of. And I've said something to this effect every week, that the Well has never sought out to be the biggest church. Like, it's not something we've ever set out to do, but we have always wanted to and will never stop being what we think is one of the bravest churches. We want to be a church that is continually brave and believing that curiosity is more important than certainty, that inclusivity is the backbone of the gospel story, and that your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. We're going to continue to be a church that is brave and move forward with bravery in what that looks like for us as we go forward. And I think for us, when I look at what does growing forward actually mean, like, what does that look like? I think it means believing that our mantra, that your seat at the table can't cost someone else, there's a mantra that created space for us, that meant so much to us. We're going to continue to make sure that mantra creates space for other people. Not because we want butts in seats, but because we know someone like Marissa, someone named whoever, is out there and doesn't know they have a seat, but deeply is hungry for a story that includes them. Growing forward, I think, does mean believing that not only our seat at the table is valuable, but our seat at the table doesn't just cost someone else theirs, but is actively a part of the work of creating space for others as well. And there's a lot of really wonderful churches out there. I think there's a lot of really, really great churches I theologically agree with and some I don't, some that are doing really great things and not. But when I look at our space, one of the things that I say is our church has been held together by a few things over the last few years. Hope, dreams, and bubble gum maybe, because it's all we can afford. It's holding things together as much as we can. We've come into this space, and if you, I'm not great at, I don't love asking people to raise their hand in the church, but who was here on the first time we ever were in this space? Is anyone here? For the few of you. You guys remember when we came in here for the first time, right? There were dartboard trophies everywhere. There was a picture of the whitest Jesus I've ever seen. He looked like he was in Star Wars. It was aggressive. It didn't feel like us, right? But we wanted to be a church that bravely said, we're going to create space for people in the space that we can find. And maybe you don't know this, back in our brewery days, we started on December 5th of 2021. We started in a brewery, and we loved it because we bravely went into a space that got us a lot of flack because we were meeting in a space that didn't feel like church, and we grew and we embraced people, and there's so many stories of the beauty of that. But we came up with a tension where we were asked to either stop advocating for queer people or keep our space. And so we said, we're going to continue to bravely choose to be the church that is for all people. And so we lost 30% of our attendance and half of our budget because our givers left. But we said that being the church God called us to be, being brave about that, was the biggest and bravest choice we could make. That it wasn't about butts and money, and it was about being the church God has called us to be. And so we came here, even though it didn't feel like who we were. But we said that our DNA was never a building. Our DNA was the people. The DNA was the way we loved each other, the way we created space for one another, the way that we continue to be a church that believed the mantra at the core of who we are, that your seat at the table couldn't cost someone else theirs. And what's beautiful about this is you've created a ripple effect that has gone further than I think any of you have seen. One of my favorite things is when I go into the O'Fallon Community Connect or the St. Charles Community Connect What's Happening pages, and I see people say, hey, I'm looking for a church in this region. And then I see some of you guys pop in there and say, hey, you should check out the Well. But the thing that's the most surprising to me is people that don't go to our church. And people I know don't agree with our church. But they say, I think you would find value in that church. I think you need to be at that church. The number of people that have found this and the ripple effect that has started. And just like Esther in this story, she does not necessarily know what's going to happen down the road, right? She makes a choice that's going to protect her as she reveals her identity, one that's going to protect her siblings and her family and her neighbors. But generations to come are radically influenced by the decision of bravery that she made. And we have an opportunity to do the same thing. When I think about what that does for us, it's a faithful response to our calling to create a future of belonging that isn't just today, but I think echoes into eternity. There's my biggest beef with evangelical or really fundamentalist theology is they care a lot about their eschatology, which is the theology of what happens after you die. It's really interested in heaven and hell. And I'm really interested in being a part of a place that creates heaven on earth, a place that lets the good news of the gospel not just happen here, but then begin to echo into eternity. That is the ripple effect of what we have the opportunity to be a part of and the opportunity to do. And so for us in this series, in this season, as we've been looking at the story of Esther, the reason we've been looking at it is because we deeply believe that God has called us to this time and to this place for such a time as this. We think that there's something ahead of us in the future. And so over the next several months and seasons ahead, one of the things that we want to talk about is how we move forward in that, how we fuel that. And what we're not going to do over the next months is have every Sunday talk about generosity. We're not going to talk about that every single Sunday. But one of the things that we want to talk about is if we truly believe in this, how do we fuel this ahead with our time and our talents and our treasure? One of the things, so I've done these nights, about 90 people have engaged with me in this, and one of the most unsuspecting things that people said to me, because over these we've talked about what it would look like for us with volunteering, and what does it look like for us to get a space, and how would we afford that? What does it look like? We have a $160,000 budget right now. All of our financials are open. You can see them anytime you want. Andrew's our treasurer. You can email him. He'd share any of those with you. But that's our budget, and the question was how do we do this? And the common thing, almost every group has said this, is I wish we would have talked about this sooner because I believe so deeply in this church. I want this church to not go away for me, and we're not in fear of going away. I want you to make sure you know that. But I want this thing to grow so that more people can have a seat at the table. And so over the next several weeks and months, we're going to invite you, challenge by choice, invitation, not expectation, to consider what it looks like to be a part of helping us fuel something that is bigger than us, but cares about us, that grows beyond us but not past us, that is something bigger than we could ever imagine. And much like Esther, has ripple effects that change the tangible experience for those that are living here and now, us included. But for the generations to come, life is radically changed in a way they never would have expected. To find a church that they never knew existed, but always hoped and dreamed for. And I think that we can be that. Not to be the only church, but to be the missing church. The church that no one was told ever could exist, but we have been actively cultivating. And so I hope that over this season ahead, we can collaborate and join in that vision together, not for any of us individually, but collectively for the story that God is writing in and through each and every one of us. So with that in mind, would you pray with me? God, I do ask that as we continue to worship in this song of reflection, an opportunity just to surrender and to ask, to put forward our questions, our concerns, our doubts, our hopes, our joys, our anticipations, our excitement, give that to you and just sit in this space with you in that. I vividly remember the first time we gathered for worship, wondering if anyone would ever come. And now standing here just on the brink of our 4th birthday, nearly 4 years later, it's beautiful to see this place you have created. I'm continually surprised by your creativity and your imagination, and more than any of that, your plan that you've set out for this church. And God, I believe that our best days are still ahead of us. And so God, I ask that you would give us courage and boldness to figure our seat at the table and imagine what that looks like, to embrace it fully, to make sure that others have theirs as well. So God, be with us as we continue to worship. Prepare our hearts to receive communion. Let this be a moment of reflection and surrender to you. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.